Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the May 19th, 2026 RAND meeting. I would like to first say thank you to Chris DeVries, the man behind the curtain. Um, he deserves a big kudos. Next, we would like to thank the RAC Communications Subcommittee for their tireless work in getting these RAND meetings and other sessions up and running and running smoothly. A few notes regarding the session. The event will be recorded. The presentation with the slides will be posted to the RAND ORSP website shortly after the meeting. This is a Zoom webinar, watch mode only, so chat will be disabled. However, you can submit questions using the Q&A function should be at the bottom of your screen. Live caption is turned, but you can disable this by using your settings. Today's agenda, we have many community kudoses that Chris will put in the chat, the PDF of this. They were also running the slides prior to starting the meeting, and there was quite a few. So kudos to everyone on that. Our presentations today, using AI in research administration, NIH compliance updates with the BESH and the BMSPs, gotta love acronyms, and the navigating federal funding changes. Other updates will come from ORSP, sponsored programs, and the new equipment threshold. At the end of the meeting, there will be a quick poll. Next, Chris. So I see that Chris will put the community kudoses in the chat. There he goes. Please feel free to look at those at any time. So for our first presentation, using AI in research administration, Alan Flippo, who is currently the chief department administrator at the Gilbert S. In Department of Computational Medicine and Bioinformatics at the University of Michigan Medical School. That's a mouthful. He brings over a decade of experience in research administration, financial management, and departmental operations. He started his career at Michigan in 2010 in sponsored programs before making stops in medical engineering, biomedical engineering, and microbiology and immunology. He was center administrator for the Automotive Research Center while in mechanical engineering. Alan is a certified research administrator, holds a bachelor's degree in accounting from the University of Findlay, and is currently pursuing an MBA and master's in business analytics at the University of Michigan, Dearborn. So I introduce to you, Alan.
Thank you, Kathy. And I'll go ahead and share here. All right, thank you. And we'll get started on utilizing AI in research administration. So some of you may have seen this at RA by Michigan. I have changed a few slides over, so some of this will be new. So first we'll get started with, and my clicker's not working, so we'll go ahead and let's do this one. All right, so some common AI platforms. So some of you may be familiar with a few of these. So Gemini, OpenAI, ChatGPT, of course, UMGPT. Microsoft Copilot, and then, of course, Notebook LM, which is a Google product. And then there's Perplexity, which is one that some of you may or may not be familiar with. And then there's Claude, which is one that is becoming more popular. And you may have seen what has come out from ITS recently about Claude Code being something that is offered, which does require a short code for payment. But that is something that we use frequently in our department as an application for some coding, and I will show you some of that later. Um, those are just some applications. There are many, many more out there, but those are some of the more popular and some of the more basic ones that are more frequently used, and I would say are the ones that would be more frequently used within our realm of administrative duties. So I would be completely remiss by ITS if I didn't go through at least uh, some of the guidance that they have posted on their website. So there are many guidance things listed on their website. So I definitely say that you should check those out as you start to use AI. So this is just one of their pages that they have. They do have some use stipulations. They talk about security and privacy. This pertains to Google AI services and ITS AI services, so UMGPT, Maisie, and the GPT toolkit. And so I'll go on to the next page, which does then also have the SPG and then the ITS AI services, which talks about what is permitted to be used on the ITS. So that would be the UMGPT Maisie site. So you'll see the different types of services that are permitted. And those are links, so you can click on them. It'll give you more information about what is actually a part of those different types of items. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but I definitely recommend checking those out as you start to use AI, as you're using it for certain things, to make sure that you're not using it for something that you shouldn't using it. And when in doubt, definitely check. Once again, here's the Google one. So you'll notice there are a lot less items on here. So you'll see there are permitted and only not permitted. There's nothing in there that says permitted with IA consultation. So that's either it's permitted or it's not permitted. So just only the two. Once again, I would definitely check that before using with any of the AI. So let's get into what are some things you can use AI for, or commonly used things with AI. So as you'll go through, you'll notice summarizing long emails or long email chains. That's a very common thing. I'll use that frequently within my email box. You may get an email where maybe you get looped in and it's already been something that's, 3, 4, 5 days, and you don't have a lot of time to go through and read through 5 days of long emails back and forth. And so maybe you want to just, get a summary of, hey, what happened here? What's going on? So that's something you can utilize AI for. Drafting email responses, something we've all dealt with. Maybe you need to make something very professional, a letter, a response. Maybe it's a faculty member that you need to make sure that you want to write it in a way that maybe they understand, or there's clarity, there's tone. So there's things that you can do. You can write it, you can put it into AI, you can ask AI to, correct it, make it more clear, maybe ask it for adjustments. And so those are some things that, I do frequently as well, just to make sure that it's hitting on all the points, and you can go back and forth with your prompts with AI. Compared document changes. So this can be anything from NIH policy changes to just proposal document changes. Sometimes, faculty send proposal documents and we want to know what exactly they changed. So you could do that. Now, with the stipulation, you don't want to put that on the public domain. So that's where you have to know that it's something that can be put on AI, and it needs to be on something that is restricted. So that kind of goes to the bottom one, which I'll get to in a minute. But it needs to make sure that it is safe and on a restricted AI platform. Draft support letters for proposals. This is something that I use very frequently. So my chair will ask, hey, can you draft up a support letter for this faculty member, this postdoc, this student, because he needs to write a support letter for their fellowship or their proposal. So I will use AI. We can put in their CV, we can pull what the proposal is, and we can draft up a support letter. And then that way he can go through and he can then make changes to however he would like to make it more personal for him, but it saves hours of him trying to draft up his own letter. Search funding opportunities. Some of you may be in a position where you help search for funding opportunities for faculty members, and that's something that AI can help you with. More specifically, there are some platforms that might be better at it than others. And so that's where finding the right AI platform for you might be beneficial. Not all AI platforms are the same, and they don't all function the same. So there might be one platform that you find may be better for you in searching for funding opportunities. And lastly, run checks on proposal documents. We know that the government is running these through quick checks to find issues. So we can do the same. However, with restrictions, don't use public AI platforms. We need to make sure that it is okay to be run through. We also need to make sure that our faculty are okay with it being run through. So we don't just want to run it through and not have them aware that we are running it through something. So it is good to check with them to say, hey, is it okay if I run this through to make sure that it is, there's nothing wrong with it. I also don't run it through on every single proposal. I only use it if it's something that might be more specific, or if it's maybe a junior faculty member who might be one of their first proposals, or if they've had issues in the past, I will check with them. So you want to make sure that it is something, though, where in that case, I would use something like UMGPT, where it is behind the firewall, it is a restricted use. So that way it's not out in the public domain, because remember, once it's in the public domain, it is in the public domain forever. We also have U of M Maisie, so there are some support tools out there. So Michigan Medicine has an Office of Research AI Letter of Support writer. There's a Human Subject Incentive Program helper. RackMetrics has a Maisie for Find a Report. There's the Gen AI help tool. There's an AI prompt coach, and there's also an SPG Maisie where you can search for SPG rules. So those are just some Maisie things out there. Those are just like chatbot things that you can ask questions just like regular Gen AI, and it will help you as well. So those are internal U of M Maisie AI tools that we also have available to us. So just be aware of those as well. So as we get into this, I'm going to show you UMGPT. So this is a prompt that I put in for a check on proposal. So what I have here is a research plan for an R35 for one of my junior faculty members. And what I'm asking it to do is to check the research plan against the NIH solicitation to make sure that it meets the requirements. And I'm wanting it to just see to make sure that there's nothing wrong with it, and make sure it wouldn't get kicked back. And so I'm using it behind the firewall so that way it's not out in the public domain, so none of the research would be public. And so it's going to run its check. And so you can see it runs the check. And so I scroll back up and you can see right away the very first one, it says you should not use specific aims. And so I do know in this one, it had one photo where the faculty member did put in specific aim 1, specific aim 2, specific aim 3, specific aim 4. Well, in an R35, you can't use specific aims. And so with that, this would get kicked back by NIH and it wouldn't be reviewed. So therefore, this wouldn't be allowed. So what it's also doing is giving me suggested fixes. So in this case, it's actually picking this out. It's giving me suggested fixes. And it's allowing me to then take it back to the faculty member saying, hey, it pulled this out, of something that otherwise might have been missed. So that's something that is useful tool for something for a faculty member that may not have thought about it. It wasn't in the actual text. It wasn't in a header. It was actually just in the actual picture diagram itself, which the faculty member didn't realize would make it unallowable. The next one I want to show you here is Copilot. So Copilot itself, this is a Michigan Medicine. So I have access to Copilot Pro as part of a beta trial within Michigan Medicine. So it's not available to everyone as of right now. But I am part of an AI group that it was made available to. So I do have Copilot within my Microsoft apps. And so I do have it in Outlook. And so one of the functionality that I have is you can see that I have a summarize button within my Outlook. And so with that, it allows me to go ahead and click to summarize an email. And so with that, I can click summarize. And so this is just the research blueprint that we all receive from OVPR. And so it will go through, and so I don't have to read the email. It will go through and summarize. So it's going to tell me that the NIH webinar beginning May 13th and a workshop, and it gives me all the dates and all the important information that I might need. So basically, it's going to pull out important information. I can do this on any long email threads. I can do this on anything that I might need. But notice at the bottom, it also says AI generated content may be incorrect. So that's also very important that any AI generated information you receive, you also need to double check it. It may not be correct. So there are times where it may misinterpret something. It may, run long strings of things together. So therefore, you do need to double check that information. And so there are times where I may still scroll down to just double check something. But it gives me a starting point to just kind of see, hey, what was in this email? What was there? Is there anything I do want to go in and maybe read further? But at least it gives me a starting point of what to look at. And so that is something you can do if it's built in. If not, you can always copy and paste. There are also other platforms within that you can purchase for Gmail and things like that, that I do know some of my faculty have purchased that are add-ins to Gmail that you can use to supplement for AI assistance within your email. Claude is another AI platform. Now, we do have Claude Opus 4.6 within UMGPT as a selection. However, Claude itself has its own platform and it does have options. There's free, and then you can also get pro. So I do have a pro account for some of the things that I do here in the department and for some of the things I work on. But with this, I'm going to put in a prompt for a just basic letter of support. And so I will ask Claude to write a basic letter of support. I like Claude for writing purposes. I find that Claude does a really good job writing letters and other types of documents. I feel that it does a good job of getting all the data and giving me what I need. So it's going out, it's trying to fill in some blanks and looking up what an AHA letter of support might look like. And so you can see that it gave me a basic letter of support. It gave me some fill in the blanks. It gave me, he, she, they, so that way we can select. It also left in some very generic information about, cardiovascular research, believing that for heart it would be cardiovascular research. And then it made it so that way we can list key resources that might be needed for the research and things like that. So this is just very generic. However, I have used it in the past where I've put in the person's CV, I've listed the link to the fellowship or uploaded the fellowship directly, and then told it that it was coming from my chair, listed my chair's information, and it has made a very specific letter of support for that person. And that's very nice because then we've had to make very few changes to the letter. So that is something that you can do as well because it will actually go out to the website. It can pull information about the foundation or the sponsor itself, and then it will go through the CV. It looks up their research and their science, and it can tailor the letter to their research, to the type of fellowship or the type of award they're applying to, and it will write the letter so that way it matches up and aligns with the research they're applying to. And then it will list the chair's name at the bottom. It puts all the information at the top, and that makes it very easy to download. And then you can copy and paste it into your own letterhead to be able to sign and send to the sponsor. So that's just one way that that AI can really assist you in expediting the process of those letters of support and making it a lot faster than how it used to be of actually having to sit down and write these, which could be very timely. The next one I want to show you, which I think is very beneficial to all the research administrators, is Notebook LM. Notebook LM is a Google product, so everyone should have access to it. And this really has a bunch of different uses. The first one I'm going to show you is a way to kind of keep resources. So Notebook LM allows you to upload resources to it. So you're creating your own knowledge bank. So in here, you'll see that I've uploaded the NSF PAPPG, and then I've uploaded the supplements that have come out in 2026. So NSF 26-200 and 26-202. And so in here, what I've done is I'll show you can upload really anything, websites, different types of files, web links, and then I go ahead and I ask it and I say, what is the max budget for a rapid proposal? And it will only search the knowledge that I have given it. So it doesn't go out and search the entire web. It only searches what I have given it, which is the NSF PAPPGs. So it comes back and it's telling you right here that, well, the earlier limit was 200,000, but now the current threshold is increased to 300,000. And it's kind of giving you this information. You'll notice the sub points that it's giving you, the 1, the 2, the 3. Those are basically the sublinks to tell you where it found that information from. And so it would tell you the page number and be able to take you to those pages where it found it. You'll also see the follow-up questions that you could click on, and that would give you more information about the rapid proposal, and you could continue clicking, getting more information. So this is where you could create multiple different notebooks for different sponsors that you may interact with frequently. And so you could have one for NSF, you could have one for NIH, you could have one for DOE, DOD. That way you could have something that you could search on frequently for questions that may come up. Where this becomes also beneficial is anyone who is looking to study for the CRA and take the CRA exam, you can put all of your study materials in here. Up in the upper right-hand corner, you'll notice it says you have audio overview, slide deck, There's video overview, you have flashcards, there's a quiz. You can create all of those things. So you can create quizzes, study guides, flashcards, podcasts, videos. So you can actually upload all of your knowledge bases. So as you go through and get your materials ready for the CRA exam, you can go through and do that. And you can uncheck these boxes off to the left. So if you have materials just for, say, human subjects, you can uncheck those boxes and then you could create a podcast. And it's only going to create the podcast on the human subjects. And so then you can save that podcast for the human subjects. And then you could create one for animal research. And you can do that for all of those. So that way you have study guides, you have podcasts, you have all of that. And then that way you have a notebook just for your CRA exam study guide. So that's something very beneficial that I think everyone could use just for studying and staying up to date with the CRA exam, uniform guidance, things like that. So I highly recommend Notebook LM for those types of things. Another Google product is Gemini. I'm not going to go through showing you Gemini. It's another just regular, AI platform. But what I am going to show you is what they have that's called a gem. It's kind of a skill assistant where you build in a knowledge task. So you're giving it a task and you're telling it what you want it to do of how it can assist you. So I've built a task as a Google Gem of an other support calendar month calculator. So the NIH recently went to calendar months with the Science CV. And with that, we want to calculate out whether or not they're over 12 months. And so with this, I can actually upload the PDF form and the gem will go through and calculate whether or not any given year of current and pending is over the 12 months. That way it'll automatically flag if there's a calendar year that's over 12 months. And I would know if we need to put in a comment or if we need to go back and talk to the faculty member. Some faculty, it may not really be beneficial to use this, but others, if they have a long other support or other current and pending, it is something that may be beneficial. So you're not going through, every single project and trying to create your own spreadsheet to do the calculation. So still working on this, but trying it out. And it is something that, does seem to could be beneficial to use. So saves a lot of time, works very quickly, but it's just something that's very easy to use. And that's just something that you can build as an assistant just to help you that they do have in Gemini. Lastly, what I want to show you is just kind of something is more advanced, but also something that isn't that difficult. But as you become more familiar with AI and feeling more capable. So this is, once again, this is in Claude. So I have a Claude Max license that allows me to do Claude Code and do some advanced applications. So this is an application that I started. So I started with a bunch of what I wanted it to do, which is basically building a budget application here. I gave it a bunch of parameters and you can see it says, okay, I'll build a grant budget application. And so it goes through. I also told it that then I wanted it to add in the RR for the NIH and the NSF. And so it's going to go through here and it's going to scroll through pretty quickly. I'll just try and keep up with everything it's doing so that we can keep on time. So it's going through, it's calculating, it's giving me the parameters. I'm also going to build in and say, I want you to connect to the data warehouse. So it's kind of going through that. It's going to build in some Python code. And then I'm telling it to do path A. It's building in the package. So there's some of the package that it came out with. So then it's connecting. I'm telling it, yes, do this path, do that path, but not that one. It's building more code. So it's building all the code I'm not really doing anything except kind of giving it feedback on what it's doing. I'm opening it, I'm trying it, I'm saying, hey, this doesn't work, this works, that doesn't work, and going back and forth with it every single time. I haven't done a single line of code the entire time other than telling it what works and what doesn't. At the end of it, I basically told it to save this as a skill because it's built it and I liked what it built. So I now have all the files on my computer because it's given me the entire package that of everything it's built so you can see all the files. And so it built this BAT file, which allows me to just double click and run, and it's going to open up the command prompt because I've built it that way. And so it's going to open a window and open the application. And so this is the application that was built by Claude, which has an export. So I can export the budget to an Excel or to an internal PDF budget, an RR budget, or an NSF form budget. You can see it has a save, it has an open. I can add personnel, I can add equipment, but this was all built by AI. I didn't code a thing. I'm not a coder. I have an accounting degree. But that's something that as you become more familiar with AI, you feel comfortable, you get some experience, that's something that can be done. And you don't have to have like coding experience. You just have to have a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of, willingness to learn. And then you can really start using it that way. Questions? And thank you.
Well, we don't have any questions in the Q&A, Alan, but I'm curious about the very last skill that you demonstrated. And could you kind of share a little bit about that? It looked to me like this is sort of a template where, because I see you can add different files into that output. Is that a correct sort of assessment of that? And then maybe practically, if let's just say I'm building a grant budget for a faculty member, how might I use this particular application that you built?
So this one, yeah, so you can, it's just similarly to an Excel file. So you would add the personnel, you could add all the budget lines, and it was really just a project that I built, late at night, kind of just to see if I could do it. Um, and then to have the output. So the output really was you would have your sub budgets, your sub PG budgets, so different departments. So you could put in different uh dept IDs for different, PIs, sub PIs, or co-investigators, and even break out their supply lines and things like that. The documents themselves were just for outputs. And so you would have an Excel output, you could have an internal budget PDF output. That way you could upload those to the path. And so that's what those were for, that were built in. And this was really just like, I built this in about 4 hours. And I wouldn't say it's 100%. I would say it's probably like 85, 90%. There's probably some kinks in it that would need to be worked out. But, does it work? Yeah, it works. It's just, I wouldn't put it out there for complete use. There's some things like you can see the F&A rate is 55% because I never changed it to Michigan's rate. And there's some things like I would have our organization as a set organization and things like that that I never actually wanted to build into the code. Um, but but yeah, it's something you could build in if you wanted to do an upload of a budget. You could do an upload type thing. You can ask AI to build that type of thing to say, hey, if I wanted to upload an old R&R budget, build an upload. So that way it would take the old, the old submission so I could do a resubmission. You could ask it to build that in.
Got it. Thanks. That's really helpful. There was a question, somebody asked if you could share what you've built with others. So it sounds like potentially there are some options there, but it's probably more, if I'm not misrepresenting this, more of like a consultative type approach as opposed to a here, have this and use it, right? So,
Yeah.
okay. And then I did get a couple questions in. So the first is, how are you handling sponsor questions that ask if AI was used in the grant application, if you're using it for a budget or justification, especially if there's just a single checkbox, right? So if the sponsor is just saying, have you used AI for this application? How are you handling that?
So the way we're handling it, the way we've been instructed is really the AI usage is really only pertains to the science portion, is the way I've been told by ORSP. When it comes to the budget or like a budget justification, to draft that part of it, AI wouldn't really pertain to that because it's not science itself. Um, if I hear otherwise, then we would change it. But the application, I mean, we're not really using AI to draft the budget yet. If I figure out a way to do it, then by all means I will. But that's a little bit more difficult, so far. The justification, that's still a little difficult because you still need some input from the faculty member about the supplies and travel and things like that. So there's still a little bit of a manual process there. Um, but from what I've been told, it's more about the science portion of drafting that type of stuff with AI.
Got it. But if there were a sponsor that just says, hey, have you used any type of AI?
Have you
It would be
used,
sort of
yeah, any type of
disclosing that.
AI, then yeah, then there'd probably be some disclosure, some disclosure of, yeah, there were AI tools used, in regards to the application.
Okay. And especially consulting with faculty too, as
Yeah.
I think you mentioned earlier.
Yes.
There is one other question. How, if someone's using sort of a budget application, how would they ensure that they're pulling the correct salary?
So that is a big question. That's kind of why this isn't live. I'm still working on it to make sure there's some verifications. Before anything like this would ever go live, it would have to make sure with ITS that it's fully linked in, and that's something we'd have to, it would only, like, something like this would have to be personal use. I'd have to trust it. I would never put anything out into the realm like that. I like dabbling in it, but there's too many things that can go wrong.
Sure.
Yeah.
Makes sense. And I did get a message that it does sound as if NSF is requiring sort of that blanket disclosure if you've used AI. So that might pertain then to things like budgets and budget justification.
Yeah.
So I think the take home message there is make sure you know what the sponsor is asking, and then also make sure that the faculty understand what they are attesting or certifying in that response.
And ORSP is your friend.
Exactly.
And get clarification.
All right. Well, fantastic. Thanks, Alan. That's all the questions we have, and appreciate the time you spent with us today.
All right.
So,
thank you.
All right. And it's my pleasure to turn things over to Diane Lehman. Diane is the Associate Director for Safety, Transportation, and the Trials team, that's STAT, in the Office of Regulatory Affairs, where she oversees the medical school's clinicaltrials.gov portfolio. She also provides training and assistance with FDA inspections of clinical trials, as well as helping to coordinate our public access compliance monitoring program. And then in support of that and NIH policy compliance, she is also increasingly involved with data management and sharing plan work, and also serves as a member of the Research Data Stewardship Initiative Working Group. So Diane, I'm going to turn it over to you for some more information about some recent NIH changes.
Thank you so much. I hope to have my screen shared appropriately in just a moment. And I don't know, are you all seeing an appropriate slideshow type?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Uh, and then I would like to just make a quick correction. I don't know whether something autofilled or what, but it's safety transparency in trials. We don't handle anything with transportation, although once upon a time I did consult with Umtree on a project they were doing as to whether or not it was a clinical trial. Okay, so this is going to be a pretty quick whisk through the topic of BESHs, basic experimental studies involving humans, and data management and sharing plans, and how they have changed this year and actually are changing for the grant applications going in this week. I understand that someone later today is going to touch on DMSPs a little bit as well. So I'm going to go with a little more detail on the BESH than on the DMSP. And I want to acknowledge that especially the data management and sharing plan slides are highly based on work that Sarah Samuel, my colleague in the Taubman Health Science Library, put together. So basic experimental studies involving humans, otherwise known as BESHs, are a new thing, a term that was created in 2019 by NIH. And they said BESHs are studies that have a lot in common with basic research. They are a kind of basic research, but they also have a lot in common with clinical trials because you're assigning people to something, you're looking at the effect of it, and I'm going to leave a ... there, and we'll talk about that as we get into how they've shifted course. So some examples I've posted on the slide there. This happens a lot in certain mechanical areas and also in fMRI studies, but they can be like sleep deprivation or other, even potentially a behavioral thing could be a BESH. So I want to give the global context. The International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, who are kind of the guidance people for publishers around the globe, follow the World Health Organization's definition of clinical trial: any research study prospectively assigning human participants or groups of humans to one or more health-related interventions to evaluate the effects on health outcomes. And they make a big point on their page of saying, when in doubt, register. Health outcomes are construed very broadly. That includes pharmacokinetics. It includes short-term changes in the body. It doesn't have to be an actual trial in a clinic about a medicine to see whether or not your condition was cured. It can be much simpler, shorter than that. And also flag that the World Medical Association Helsinki ethical standards require registration of all human subject studies, even those that are strictly observational. Now, that's registration in clinicaltrials.gov. That's not results reporting. So the old challenge with BESHs as trials, which they have been since 2019, is that some BESH outcomes that are derived are very abstract still. They may be lots of images. They may be lots of electrical signaling things that may or may not be easy to translate into the very simple tables that are required in clinicaltrials.gov. Everything in clinicaltrials.gov is numbers in tables. And so while some pretty complex things like area under a curve can be shown with a table, some of these other things really just couldn't. Some of our faculty had other NIH opportunities to share their results, and those were all taken as good alternatives. But NIH had meetings in 20 and 21 trying to solve this problem. They never did. And so they kept renewing their enforcement discretion or their flexibilities regarding enforcement. That seemed odd. So with this change of administration, and I'm not saying it wouldn't have happened under a different president, I'm not pegging it to the president at all, but for years, COGR, Council of Government Relations, has said we have too much administrative burden. So this was seized upon as a golden moment to reduce burden. So lo and behold, in January, they came out with this notice saying basic experimental studies involving humans will no longer be considered clinical trials. The easy part is, starting this week, you apply for them under non-trial NOFOs, unless one grant is having both a basic experiment studying humans and a more traditional clinical trial within it. Then, of course, you would apply under a NOFO that allows a clinical trial. So it seems like, okay, well, now clinical means clinical. Yeah, yes and no. The way they expect the 4 questions about human subjects to be answered are, in most of BESHs, but not necessarily all, would be yes, they involve humans. Yes, they're assigned to an intervention. Usually, yes, it's looking at the effect of the intervention on the participants. But no, we're no longer going to call it a health-related biomedical or behavioral outcome, because they've now said, though they haven't changed the wording of the definition, which I have over here in the corner, they have said under the definition, it's only going to count as a health-related outcome if it's has the potential for direct advancement of health. So direct sounds like it's happening if the test is successful, but potential sounds like it's a little farther back. So my concern on your faculty members' behalf is what I call threading the needle. A grant is normally going to be written to say, look, this is going to make a difference. But if it's a BESH, now it's going to have to be written in a way to say, this will make a difference pretty soon. But it's not a direct advancement of human health yet. Therefore, it's a basic experiment studying humans, and therefore it's not a clinical trial. Now, what makes it still more confusing is that there's a very conflicting language, even on that notice of the change, about whether or not human subjects protections requirements, which adhere by their terms to trials, that is to say GCP training and data safety and monitoring boards, not the same thing as data management and sharing plans, DSMBs, whether those which have always adhered just to trials are still going to be applicable to the BESHs. And I'll come back to that in just a moment. Meanwhile, we have 2 web pages, both on NIH, both current, which say opposite things. The way that you harmonize them is you have to pay attention to the yellow box. Are you looking at the page talking about the old rules, or are you looking at the page talking about the new rules? But I will flag that some of the FAQs that are on NIH pages may come from one page or another, but they may not be flagging that there's still old rules in effect for all of your old grants. Any grant, even one that you submitted in January, hasn't yet been funded, still has to follow the old rules. It is a BESH is a trial. It will need to have GCP, et cetera, and it will need to report results in clinicaltrials.gov. So we are going to have years of overlapping requirements. So do these other related trial-related requirements apply? Their notice said human subjects protection still apply. And so does the data management and sharing policy. Well, the data management and sharing policy is a no-brainer. It's a giveaway, because that applies to all NIH-funded research. It could be bench research. It could be animal research. And you'd have to have a data management and sharing policy. It still doesn't really answer the question for us about those other human subjects protections, because on their terms, written by other parts of HHS than NIH, those are trial-related, not clinical research. Now, a little window into NIH's changing thinking came up last Wednesday. I happened to join a webinar by NIH on the modernization of data safety and monitoring. Again, not data management and sharing, but safety and monitoring. And I've merged a couple of the slides from that webinar together. But in essence, they're saying clinical research, not clinical trials, clinical research is a big category. Clinical trials are a smaller part of that. We have had rules in place for data safety and monitoring that are the same rules since 1998. They basically are 2 tiers. PI does it themselves, or it needs a data safety and monitoring board. Some of you have had studies that have those under the IRB. That's a very high bar. And what they're saying now is that's ignoring a lot of gradations in risk, gradations in and issues regarding data integrity. And so they're planning over the course of the next 2 years to make a more risk calibrated oversight structure. Who knows how that's going to look in terms of changes in grant applications, but these things will probably go into effect sometime in 27. And they make the big point of saying clinical trials are only about a third of our of NIH funded clinical research, which itself is only about 40% of the NIH research portfolio more broadly. And so they're trying to expand their attention to data integrity and human subjects protection more broadly than just clinical trials. So though the wording from a legal standpoint for GCP does not apply to those BESHs, I would hesitate to say to a PI, oh, no, you don't have to worry about that anymore. We just don't know yet. There are a lot of web pages that still need to be updated. The National Task Force I sit on regarding clinicaltrials.gov posed a lot of these questions to some NIH people at Opera, and they keep saying every month, those are good questions. We really care about them. We'll get back to you. 3 months that's been going on. So remember that the lower burden, the no results reporting, only applies to grants going in right now. It does not apply to all the grants that have gone in over the last few years. So it's going to be a slow wind down. We're going to have sort of 7 years of fog and a little wind added to it. So the way I would put it, for new grant applications, it's easy. Just use the non-trial NOFOs unless there's another trial attached. For all your RPPRs, for grants that are existing already, they're still going to have all the connections with clinicaltrials.gov registration and results reporting. And here's some tips for PIs and study teams. You should have access to these slides after today. I'm going to move on to data management and sharing plan and do some very brief fundamentals and updates. I know I have very few minutes in which to do that. So a reminder of the policy. Purpose is for advancing rigorous and reproducible research, sharing public trust, and getting more research bang for the buck by people sharing their data. The details were that you had to have a data management and sharing plan. It's submitted with the application. It should maximize appropriate data sharing. You're expected to comply with the rules and monitor that you're complying with it, and use established repositories no later than the time of the Associated Public or the publication or the end of the performance period. These are the old elements of the data management and sharing plans, which your faculty had to write. They were two pages more or less, and they were essentially all free text. The new form, which many of you have probably already been filling out for people, is yes, yes, yes. And if you said no to any of the first three questions, then you have to say why not within no more than 300 words. You're basically just certifying that you will follow NIH's goals and plans. Will privacy rights and confidentiality be protected? Yes. We want the answer always to be yes. But NA is there for if it's animal research, obviously not involved. So the tricky part is question one. Will there be maximum appropriate sharing of data? Well, if the confidentiality or the informed consent set did not allow for sharing, then you're doing the maximum appropriate amount. Do you answer yes to that question? I think the answer is yes, but we have no FAQs to help interpret that. So the rules apply now. There are strict word limits. There are no sample plans because they aren't really plans. And they have said very clearly that this new format page is a pilot. What doesn't change? We always have wanted, especially since 2023, to maximize timely, respectful sharing, protecting people's privacy. That means making a plan. Even if a plan doesn't have to be submitted with the grant, PIs should still make a plan, because if they don't make a specific plan, they're not going to think about how much budget does it take, how much work will it take to follow that plan, and then Of course, we also want to follow the plan and report back to NIH. Here are a few of the things we don't know about the new rules. My biggest concern is if they're only checking these attestation boxes and they're not writing their own plan, will they do what you need them to do as far as thinking through the work involved, budgeting appropriately? Of course, we don't know how long the pilot will last. Some pilots last 6 months, some last 20 years. And there will be some, and they said they're specifically revising these plans to aid compliance monitoring. It's unclear whether they mean because it's easier to check these going in if it's a simple form and all we're looking for is boxes checked. Or do they mean they're trying to save time on the way in order to put more effort into monitoring compliance with data deposits? And are people doing the job they said they would? So here are my recommendations. I've already kind of touched on most of them. Do ask PIs to think about what data repositories they're going to use, because some have fees and some don't. Some people say, I'm going to put my data in Deep Blue, not realizing that their data cannot go in Deep Blue. So don't be too hasty in saying a plan. Although luckily under the new table, you can say an example and you're not bound into that. It would not take a revision or an amendment with an RPPR in order to pick a different repository. The library has lots of good guides that you can access and your PIs can access on writing good plans. Pardon me. Lots of other good resources. We gave a more detailed webinar for Navigate just last week, and those slides and that recording are up on the Navigate page. So a little plug for that. And then I will say within the med school, we don't know whether eventually we'll expand this beyond the med school, but my office is starting a little pilot of friendly check-ins regarding data management sharing plan implementation. We're just doing pre-piloting now, literally like a few PIs. I hope to be doing it on a little larger scale in the summer and fall. We're basically saying, congratulations on your recent publication. Did you put your data where you said you would? We're only looking at grants since 2023. Is this all the data you'll be collecting? If so, we won't bother you for the rest of your publications. Or if you didn't, why? Is it because it's a methods paper and there's no data behind it? Great. Is it because you forgot and you're going to do it now? So we're just getting that started. And the reason we're doing it is because while most of our DMSPs in Element 6 said, the PI said, I will be the one monitoring this. And that was a legitimate answer. NIH did say at various webinars back in 23 that they could hold the whole institution responsible. So we just want to get a little sense of what the size of our compliance is. Are we at 98% great, or do we have more we have to attend to? Thank you.
Thanks for that whirlwind of information, Diane. And I did drop the link to the recording from the webinar that just occurred on some of the NIH changes. So folks should feel free to access that webinar as needed. So thanks again for your time today.
Reach out to me anytime. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, at this point, excuse me, I'd like to introduce Adriana Trusiak to the virtual stage, if you will. So Adriana is the Director of Research Development in the Office of the Vice President for Research. She joined the Office of Research Development in 2023 to support interdisciplinary research teams at U of M. And in her role, she develops strategies to respond to emerging federal priorities and funding opportunities, develops resources for U of M researchers and staff, and provides proposal management support to research teams. Previously, Adriana was a research coordinator for the Great Lakes Bioenergy Research Center, which is a DOE-funded bioenergy research center where she managed those center operations. So I'm going to turn it over to Adriana, and we'll go through some changes, navigating some changes in the federal funding landscape. Adriana?
Great. Thank you so much for this introduction, Chris, and thank you all for having me here today. Please let me know. I am off campus today and my internet is a little tricky, so please let me know if anything happens, but hopefully it will be good. So we can go to the next slide. So as Chris mentioned, I will be talking to you about all the changes happening, and it sounds like you're already having a lot of discussions around it. and we're going to really focus on shifts we've seen in funding mechanisms, what we expect, what priorities are happening, and how we can better support faculty through navigating all these changes. We can go to the next slide. So Chris already mentioned I'm a Director of Research Development in the Office of the Vice President for Research. And I'll give you a very brief overview of just what our office does. So on the next slides, it kind of summarizes the 3 pillars of our work, but we work with faculty to pursue funding opportunities, focusing on large-scale interdisciplinary funding, helping them with proposal management. We also provide grant writing and skill building workshops for faculty. And last but not least, we develop resources programs and internal funding programs to increase faculty competitiveness, again, focusing on the building interdisciplinary teams. And what we've been doing for the past year and a half is really focusing on tracking all the federal funding changes and trying to understand what's happening and how to best support faculty. We've seen changes in both mechanisms and solicitations, staffing, communications, and priorities. So I'll go into details with all of those. But with all these changes, what's really critical, and I have it on the next slide, is staying current on requirements and following up frequently to ensure accuracy, compliance, and timely action. We've seen now again and again changes that sometimes are inconsistent. There is not all the information given at the same time. And so staying current and really following up is one of the best ways to support our faculty and researchers across campus. So what we've seen in the changes in funding mechanisms is simplification in funding priorities. And I have simplification in quotation marks because while these funding announcements and opportunities look simpler, they actually are just more broader announcements that don't have as much detail and put more pressure on researchers to be reaching out to program managers, to be looking into the websites for institutes, for directorates, to try to determine what are the priorities for the administration, what is the administration looking for to apply for. So there's more work on the faculty, there's more work on administrators as well to really understand what is being asked for. There's also a switch to more rolling deadlines. Again, we know how faculty work, and it's hard to really stick to deadlines as is. And now with rolling deadlines, that makes it tricky of knowing when to apply. And even when funding agencies have rolling deadlines, they usually have multiple periods when they review. So that again falls back on the researchers to be reaching out and knowing when's the best to apply. There are also new announcements formats. So grants.gov have switched to simplegrants.gov, which is a more simplified format. And then I'll show in the next slide in just a second, new templates for NIH solicitations. In addition to that, we're seeing much more investigator-initiated funding opportunities. So you might have heard of NIH highlighted topics. While those are not funding opportunities, sometimes there's money associated with them. So those are areas of priorities for different institutes and centers within NIH, and it's on the investigators to be following those and reaching out to program officers to figure out whether there is funding there and if their research fits within the highlighted topics. And last but not least, but there's streamlining of all the requirements. So Dan was just talking about all the different changes to data management plan. We've also had that switch to common forms that's now is going to be fully applied. We've seen with Genesis, it's unclear if that's going to be happen, but we've seen, for example, that facilities were limited to one page with focus on the facilities that apply to the project. So we might see more and more of streamlining and simplification of some of the requirements. So as I mentioned, one of the change that I provided example on the next slide is the new solicitation template. So I believe these slides will be changed, and this was a new recent call that came out from NIH for early stage investigators. And this is how the solicitation now looks like. It's very different from what we're all probably used to for NIH. It's meant to be simplified. It's meant to be made easier. But again, it's just going to take getting used to and figuring out where all the information is. And we expect that in the next year, all of the funding opportunities will be rolling into a new template. It's unclear whether this will be the final template they're going to be using or if it's going to be changed even more. But you can look more into it once you get this presentation and just view this as an example. In addition to changing in funding mechanisms, we're seeing a lot of changes in staffing. So as you know, throughout last year, there has been a lot of layoffs at federal agencies leading to understaffing and turnover. There's much less experienced staff at these agencies, which leads to slower and more generic responses, and just makes it harder to get answers to questions. There are some positive signs. We're seeing hiring at NIH and NSF, particularly in grant management. So hopefully some of these positions will be filled and allow for better communication. But one tip here that was especially really clear during the Genesis mission was making sure that when you reach out, asking very clear and direct questions. We've seen that when there were more broader questions asked during webinars, the program officers were just reading word for word from solicitations that were not written really well. So quoting the solicitation back and asking, what do you mean, expand on this, what actually needs to be done is really critical right now when you're trying to get the right response. In addition, so one of the ways to deal with the staffing shortages is that the agencies are changing how the funding opportunities are operating as well. So we're seeing much more limited submission opportunities. So that's the University of Michigan can only submit a limited number of proposals for a given call. And we're also seeing tighter turnaround, which on average 6 to 12 weeks for even large-scale opportunities. The general feeling is agencies are doing that to limit numbers of proposals received and basically make it easier on them on the review process. So we're, trying to, I'll talk about strategies on how to think about that and how to be prepared with these tighter turnarounds. Now, one of the things with limited submission opportunities, so OVPR runs limited submission opportunities for majority of the call, other than medical school runs any medical related limited submission opportunities. And so we're trying to think about improving our process and make them as quick as possible to give faculty as much time as they can to submit the full proposal. In addition to that, what we're seeing with funding is other transaction agreements becoming more common. So that's a funding mechanism, that's a contract, it's not a grant. And oftentimes you have to kind of sign on or agree to these agreements before, during the time when the proposals are submitted, and those require redlining for ORSP. So again, being in touch with ORSP when you're seeing a different funding mechanism, making sure you're aware of what needs to be done is really critical right now with these other transaction agreement, as well as with other funding pathways. So we're seeing also more challenges, prizes, and awards, which are all different funding mechanisms than our typical grants. Some of them are phrased really weirdly. The way their funding is done sometimes is post work being done. So really critical to have a communication. And if you have faculty reaching out about these more uncommon funding opportunities, being on top of it and getting questions ahead of time. That all leads to really right now having clear communication. And one issue is that with understaffing at the federal agencies, there are very fragmented channel, and where to find information is changing. A lot of the web content is being centralized due to understaffing. And so there's almost new channels emerging on when to find the right information. Our team specifically has found LinkedIn to be sometimes the best way to see funding opportunities early, to see requests for information early. So I've been following a lot of program officers, following different centers and institutes, following NSF, to just see where things are promoted. One example is, for example, with the DOE Genesis mission, their webinars were not really well promoted, and I saw them for the first time on LinkedIn. And that also, webinars and office hours are another way to really learn what funding agencies are looking for. So keeping an eye out for them, both from funders as well as sometimes affiliated agencies host webinars. So for example, NSF X Labs just came out last Friday, and IUDP, which is affiliated agency, is hosting a webinar already this Thursday to discuss that funding opportunity. So what can we expect for this next year? So on the left, I have listed, those are the scientific priorities that came out for now in the FY27 presidential budget request. So that's a request that comes out from the White House, and it still has to be approved by Congress. In addition to these scientific priorities, which reflect really priorities from last year and focus much more on the applied research, there's policy and funding levels proposals, including cuts to federal funding agencies from up to 50%. There's still talk of the 15% IDC. It's unclear where that's going. It's been struck down by the courts, and there's been discussion about the FAIR model in Congress. So there's still lack of clarity where that's going to go. And last but not least, there's requests for multi-year funding, which we're already seeing happening. It's where multi-year grants are funded. The funds are allocated during the first year ahead of time instead of funds being allocated every year. Again, I want to emphasize that this is a budget request. It hasn't been passed yet and ratified. So with all these changes, what can you do to support U of M researchers? The most important thing is being prepared. So having templates and supplementary documents ready, both on your end, as well as making sure that faculty are always ready. And then monitoring any changes. Like I mentioned, we're seeing changes, I think, again, with the Genesis call, that's the most recent example, but we've seen solicitation updated up to, I think, week before it was due. And we were told there was not going to be extensions, and they extended the call by 3 days. So staying on top of it is really helpful. With the shorter timelines, it's really critical to think about how you adjust the timelines and getting faculty and researchers to reach out to you early. So as soon as they decide they might be applying, making sure that they reach out and they don't wait until they start developing the proposals. It's also for you thinking about how do you plan ahead and how do you adjust and support each other with these shorter turnaround. So it's really about again, template, lessons learned, sharing updates. And this is also a good time. I want to just make a plug for all the research development emphasis across campus. I have links later on to the offices in Med, in College of Engineering, LS&A, that are all happy to help support proposal development and take some of the burden from research administrators. Another tip is to really be encouraging PIs to consult with program officers early and often from funding agencies. That's the best way to get insights about what's needed, what funding might be coming, and also how to handle large budgets for proposals. Talking about budgets, it's critical to develop clear budgets and budget justifications. So budgets are under more scrutiny than ever. And again, guidelines are changing. We're seeing shifting models to more DARPA and ARPA-H models where budgets are developed based on milestones and tasks and have to be broken out different ways. So making sure you follow proposal guidelines and really provide information where the funds will be spent. With all these changes, it's critical, as I already mentioned, to monitor all the alternative channels like LinkedIn, like other social media channels. It's also good to have a network within institution and with other institutions for any updates and insights. And last but not least, it's critical to pass these insights as you learn them. So stay informed, but also share it with your network, share it with other research administration with research and development folks. Chances are, if you have a question or you learned something new you didn't know, someone else didn't know it as well. So these are some of the tips, and at the end, I know I'm almost at time, so I'll just rush through. I added some resources for ways to support faculty. So here I added some of the how to find funding opportunities, as well as help align proposals and help faculty think about how they align proposals. So still the golden standard is grant.gov, it's sam.gov for finding funding. Library still provides funding consultations and have their research guide. Office of Research Development has a Blueprint newsletter where we highlight some of the funding opportunities, and other newsletters on campus, like Med School's newsletter or COE also highlight specific funding opportunities. If faculty is looking for funding and they're not sure what's out there or what might be coming, again, I listed the funding priorities for both NIH and SF. Other fund agencies have their funding priorities listed as well. It's good then to be reaching out to program officers and asking them what might be coming down the pipeline. And there's some resources we've developed on how faculty could be reaching out to program officers. For planning and developing applications, as Arizu mentioned, the Office of Research Development really help faculty with proposal management and project management, and I listed a link to some of the offices on campus on the left. And then it's obviously as well is super critical to stay up to date on all the policy updates, like some of them that were discussed today. So signing NIH, even though it doesn't send out funding opportunities in their Friday emails, they still send out their notices every Friday. So you can sign up for that email, and ORSP has been really great about sending all the updates and having updates like the one today. And last but not least, we know federal funding landscape is really shifting. Faculty are nervous about what's happening. So address some of that, we have internal funding programs like the highly rated decline proposal programs. There's more pilot and seed funding opportunities across campus that are listed on Research Commons. And then there's alternative strategies for funding, so corporate and foundation relations, innovation partnership, and FFMI and Med School all provide consultations to discuss opportunities for funding within the philanthropic and foundation space, as well as with industry. So you can explore these more, but that's all I had for today. Sorry for rushing and going a little bit over time, but thanks so much for having me here. And yeah, if you have any questions at any time, you're welcome to reach out to us, to our office to discuss more.
All right. Thanks, Adriana. Appreciate it. And we don't have any questions in the chat. There was one that came in, but Andrea took that one. So thanks again. Andrea, over to you.
Thank you, Chris. All right, a few updates from ORSP today. Next slide. Oh, and next slide. One more. Okay, so we've got a number of updates from our federal sponsors that I want to share with you today and go over in a little bit of detail. So as you might be aware, NIH has removed the leniency period at this point for use of Common Forms and Science CV for other support and BioSketch. As of May 7th, those are now required to be done through Science CV. And when investigators do not submit through Science CV or do not use the Science CV forms, that is considered a non-compliant proposal and could be rejected for administrative non-compliance. Next slide, please. NIH has also required a certification now from investigators to ensure they are not part of a malign foreign talent recruitment program. The NOT related to this is listed here on the slide. This is required for all senior key personnel, and it is required for all RPPR submissions. We have a template out on our website that you can find for making this certification, but we also anticipate that this will be done through the Science CV forms. when NSF released this requirement, they did not have that form updated at that time. So that is why we have a template out on our website currently. Next slide. Thanks. A number of other changes coming up from NIH the last few months since we last met. The prior approval module is now required to be used for all NIH prior approval requests. Previously, we were allowed to submit some of these through email, but it is now required that we use the module for everything. They're also requiring effective June 1st, in just a couple of weeks, that prior approval be obtained for the addition of any new domestic subawards on awards. So previously, we were allowed to do this without obtaining prior approval, but that is no longer the case. NIH, Chris says my audio went way down, so I'm not sure what happened. Is that better?
It's like
Chris?
really soft. It just kind of cut out almost.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
That's
Is
okay.
it better now?
There it goes. Much
Computer
better,
closed.
yes.
Okay. Okay, so I was just saying that prior approval for domestic subs will be required as of June 1st. Previously, prior approval was not required. The notice for this change is listed here on the slide. Effective immediately, advanced permission from NIH institutes is no longer required for R13 or U13 conference grants. So previously, prior to submitting for these opportunities, applicants had to receive approval to submit. This is no longer required. And as mentioned in the earlier presentation from Diane, I won't dive into this since it's already been gone over thoroughly. There is a new definition of an intervention for purposes of defining what constitutes a clinical trial. Next, thank you. There's also updates to the DMS plan requirements, both from NIH and NSF. So we'll talk about NIH first. They are requiring the use of the new updated form starting May 25th in just a few days. This has a condensed structure to reduce administrative burden of completing the form and focus in on the data points that NIH really requires as part of reviewing these plans. So this is an adjustment that they've made based on their findings from the initial rollout of these plans. And just a reminder that data management plans and sharing practices should be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. These are the key guidance points from NIH. Next slide. NSF has also launched a DMP web form for use in providing the data management plan through research.gov. The form is dynamically tailored to the directorate and ensures that specific data requirements are addressed by the PI in that form. Proposals initiated before April 27th can still utilize the PDF form. Of course, we are well past that point, so everyone should be using this form going forward. NIH has also updated their policy on continuous submission and rules around accepting late submissions. They will be ending continuous submission effective August 10th. They have a strict 2-week window for late applications, and leniency only applies in extenuating circumstances for PDPIs. There is additional guidance out on NIH's website about what those circumstances might be, but they are extremely limited. Primarily, this is focused on providing leniency for folks who have been serving on panels for NIH. So it is sort of their way of replacing continuous submissions. Late submissions are now prohibited for fellowships, SBIR, STTR, and international collaboration grants. Next slide. And a little bit about what's going on here at ORSP. So you may have seen there have been some updates to our workflows for Ironclad. We've added some new automated email notifications at the beginning and end of a contract negotiation. So at the time a contract is launched in Ironclad, the PI and primary research administrator now receive a detailed email explaining how to access the workflow and providing information about who will be negotiating that agreement within ORSP. And at the end, once a contract is executed, the PI and primary research administrator are now receiving a automated email with a copy of that fully executed agreement or amendment attached, so that they have that final document in hand as soon as it's available. And it also provides a survey link. So if there's feedback about that specific negotiation, that link can be used to provide that to ORSP. Ironclad has made some updates as well in the platform that we want to make sure that you're aware of. They've revitalized the workflow page as of April 23rd to improve user experience and provide easier navigation for users when they're looking for information about what is going on with their agreement negotiation. It also provides better access to the data about that agreement and enhances the audit trail visibility. Next slide. We have recently published a guide for agreement terms negotiation with U of M for sponsored research related agreements. This guide is published on our website for sharing with external parties who may be negotiating a sponsored research related agreement with our office. And it provides information about the university's standard positions on a number of key clauses that are typically negotiated when dealing with external parties. This can be used to sort of ease the negotiation process and prepare outside parties for what will likely be requested changes in the agreement if it's drafted in a way that does not align with these particular terms. We also wanted to let you know that our website revitalization is coming soon. We are going to be launching a new site, hoping to do that in late May. And that site will include things like an announcement hub and a rapid archive for finding critical information published in our newsletter or critical announcements in a timely way. And that is all the updates I have. Are there any questions? It looks like there might be some.
Got one in the Q&A, yep.
So Patrick asked if we should distribute that information regarding contract terms to potential sponsors. Yes, absolutely. That would be wonderful. That is why we've published it out there, to help have a way to facilitate some of those discussions early before the contract even reaches us.
And that's all we have.
All right, I'm going to hand it over to Brian then. Thanks, Chris.
All right, thanks, Andrea. And I'm here today on behalf of Debbie Talley. She sends her regards, but she had a conflict and wasn't able to make it today. So I will cover both the sponsor programs updates and then some information about threshold changes for equipment. So update number one, it's May, which means it's that time of year again. Fiscal year end is just around the corner. We have about 6 weeks left. And that means PricewaterhouseCoopers is on site starting their prep work for the annual uniform guidance audit. So this year's audit is on the biannual cycle. So we'll be looking at R&D projects once again. And as in years past, if a R&D project that is one in your department is selected, we will make sure that we give you the heads up that it is in the sample population. But as with all prior audit experiences, our expectation is that the local RA staff and the associated project teams shouldn't need to be directly involved. All of the audit testing is about expenditure activity. And our folks are usually more than able to answer all those questions. But if we do have something we need your help with, we'll definitely reach out. Next slide, Chris. So this is the first slide to talk about threshold changes. So if you recall, about this time last year, the university was notified of our new 5-year FNA rate agreement that runs from 24 to 29. The change last July was the change in the OSA rate. The change this July is the change in thresholds for both subaward and equipment thresholds. So specifically for the contract administration team, they will be moving to a new threshold of $50,000 of exclusion for the indirect cost rates, which means that the first 50 will be subject to indirect cost calculation. That will be true only for new awards that are issued with an effective date of July 1st of 26 or later. So we've had 12 months of knowing this was coming, which should hopefully mean that all of the applications and submissions that have gone in over the course of the last year with an anticipated start date of 7/1 of 26 are going to come in with that additional amount of money to cover the increase in indirect costs. There is a late breaking challenge to that specifically for NIH. NIH has issued a recent NOT interpreting a congressional appropriation indirect cost mandate to indicate that the NIH itself is not able to move forward with the increase to the 50,000 threshold as it stands currently. And so folks in our contract administration office are well aware of that. And if you have any questions about any specific subaward issuance after July 1st on new awards that have arrived, both federal and non-federal, please feel free to reach out to them for clarification or help if you believe you need it. Next slide, Chris. On behalf of Chris Becken, I'm here to thank you for your continued efforts with her folks on eliminating the backlog of closeout projects. It continues to drop significantly. This is the time of year when our reporting team makes the most progress on that front because we have not as many external reports that they have to work on. So they are just asking for your continued partnership and collaboration and looking forward to making even more progress on these numbers before the fall busy season kicks off for them. Next slide. Once again, it's that time of year, May, end of the academic year for students, which generally translates into our list of new hires. And so I'm happy to report that we've got 4 folks who have recently joined our reporting team as of yesterday. So hot off the presses, we have Jordan Aiello, Stephanie Iacoben, Alice Lopiano, who you may know because she has been on our UG team for a number of years. And then our intern for this summer, Dylan Poster. So for those of you who are on the receiving end of report submission requests, these might be some of the new names that you'll see. And then one item in the personnel space that we didn't put on the slide because I'm not 100% sure she would want me telling you all. But for any of you who've happened to work with Jean Haney, she is celebrating her 30-year anniversary at the university this month. And as part of her celebration, she is going to be retiring at the end of May. So currently she's been doing some training for some new staff in our customer service team. So she's not doing a lot of direct face-to-face or project-related transactions at this point. But if you've worked with Jean, I'm sure she would be appreciative of you reaching out and letting her know that you'll miss her time at the institution. We look forward to what she's got to have coming in the future. And many of us are jealously looking at her and looking forward to our own retirement days to come. All right, next slide. So this is where I'll be pitch hitting for folks from our financial operations and procurement departments. They were planning to attend today, but everyone's got conflicts, so I am the designated hitter. These slides are specifically about the other change in threshold, which is the switch for our equipment from 10,000 or from 5,000 to 10,000. So Chris, next slide. these slides are fairly wordy. I'm not planning to read them to you or go into them in excruciating detail. Just suffice to know that, like we've talked about for the last year, the capitalization threshold for equipment is moving from 5,000 to 10,000. This is the first change in the university's equipment capitalization threshold in almost 30 years. So it has been quite a while since we have made a switch in this space. Chris, if you can go to the next slide. The folks in FinOps and in property control are in the process of updating their websites and all of the information. The controller's office sent out an email to that effect last week to the deans, directors, department heads. The primary message in that is that as of July 1st, the equipment threshold is moving to $10,000. And that means for any pieces of equipment that are charged to a project from 7/1 of 26 forward, they will only be categorized as equipment if they are $10,000 or greater. That'll be true for all university funding sources, all non-federal sponsored sources, and all federal sponsored sources for projects that start July 1st of 26 or later. So Chris, you jump to the next slide. But of course, we couldn't just make it easy for everybody. There had to be a carve out, and in this case, the F&A rate agreement makes it very clear that for federal awards, we are not allowed to move that threshold from 5,000 to 10,000 for any project that started before July 1st of 26. So for however long it takes for all of those projects to run through their life cycle, if a federal project that starts before July 1st of 26 purchases any items of equipment, that equipment threshold will continue to be at $5,000. And for activity on purchases between $5,000 and $9,999.99, there's a new account code, which you can see here on the slide, 614015 for those purchases. Both FinOps and property control are doing their level best to get that information out to as many people who are involved in the procurement and inventory process as possible. But we are anticipating that there will be a fair amount of cleanup activity for the first few months, if not for the first year or so. And translation on that, do your best, but just know that folks in central offices will be closely monitoring all the activity in this space and making any necessary corrections if they are so warranted. All right. This is just another slide saying what I've already said, that for the non-federal projects and the university funds, everything switches to 10,000 as of July 1st. Next slide. And then we put together a little bit of a decision tree tool to help if you need it to make your way through the purchasing process and knowing what account code is the appropriate one to use. And these slides will be available as usual after the RAN meeting, and all of the updates to the FinOps and the procurement websites will be completed before July 1st as well. All right. And here's some contact information for the folks in financial operations and property control, in case you have any specific questions that the slides or myself didn't answer for you. And as we get questions in, I will make sure that we get the information recorded and then, if necessary, updated on the FinOps websites and the information that they've put together for folks to help them make the right choice. All right, I think that's my last slide, but I did agree to give a little bit more call outs for the procurement and property control folks. One, property control is getting ready to kick off their biennial inventory this July. So they are doing presentations across campus to your asset control staff all over the institution. But once again, to the research admin community, you've heard Deb on more than one occasion come to this group and ask you all for help in making sure that all of our inventory is tracked down, documented, and recorded appropriately. And so we will put that request out in front of you again before this process gets started. And then the last item they asked me to mention is, if you get the procurement newsletter, you likely already saw this. They procurement services are diligently working through the analysis of the tariff issue in relation to items that were purchased during the last year that had a tariff component to them, and therefore, after the recent Supreme Court ruling, are potentially due a refund. So their ask to campus is that if by any chance you get a specific question in that regard, or you have a specific question, that you please reach out to procurement services, and they are going to be doing their level best to get as much of that money back for the university as possible. And they will have more information forthcoming in future procurement communications. Okay, I think that's the end of the slide deck for me. Chris, did we get up with any questions?
Yes. Back to the subaward IDC matter that you brought up. Will new subawards issued 7/1/26 or later on existing projects also be subject to the new threshold?
They will not be. So it's specific to only new awards that start on or after July 1st of 26.
Okay.
That will have the new threshold applied.
Got it. And then the next question, if we request IDC on the first 50K of a subcontract on an NIH application, are you expecting they won't provide it?
Correct. That is what we've heard from our peers who already are in the space of having a increased threshold on their FNA rate agreement, that they were receiving NOAAs that used the 50,000, and then about a month and a half ago they started receiving new notices of awards where that was not the case. And as of yet, NIH hasn't provided any clear guidance for those institutions on if they're expected to go back and make modifications to their IC calculations. So there's a few questions that are still kind of floating around. And then the biggest one of all is that this entire NOT from NIH is predicated on a component of the NIH appropriations bill. And there's already efforts afoot to ensure that the appropriation bill for FY27 is written in a way that would allow NIH to pay the indirect costs on the first 50,000. So this is one of those items that will continue to evolve over the next number of months.
Got it. All right. Well, that was all the questions we had.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to turn it back over to Kathy then, and thank you all for your time.
Thanks, Brian. A lot of interesting developments. Seems like day by day there's something new. So as always, we would like to ask everyone to complete the poll. Tell us how relevant today's meeting was, a scale from 1 to 5. Excuse me. We'll give you a few minutes for that. In the meantime, on behalf of the RAC Communications Subcommittee, I'd like to thank all the presenters. I've learned a lot of new information, and it's all very valuable information, especially with the changing landscape on everything, it seems, nowadays. The webinar and the slides will be posted on the ORSP website under the RAN webpage. Usually comes out in a couple weeks. I'll make sure to post that on the RA Slack forum, so for easy access. And conclusion, just want to wish everyone a very happy Memorial Day weekend. Stay safe. We're supposed to have beautiful weather. So with that, Chris, I think we're at the end.
Yeah, and just a reminder that we will have our next RAN meeting on Friday, September 25th. That coincides with National Research Administrator Day. We have a planning team in RAC Communications that's working out more details, and we'll be sure to communicate that as soon as those are available. So thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.